And now on to Syria's ongoing civil war. A new report reveals that not only have thousands of Syrian children died, many have actually been targeted, according to the Oxford Research Group. Over 11,000 children have been killed. Among them, 784 have been executed, and over 300 have been targeted by snipers. What's most troubling is that 100 children have been tortured, and some of those have been infants. We now turn to a short piece of video out of Syria filmed within the last year. Please note that what you're about to see involves the shooting of a child. It is both graphic and very disturbing. Joining us from London, England, is Hana Salama, co-author of the new report entitled Stolen Futures, the Hidden Toll of Child Casualties in Syria. Hana, thank you very much for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me.
This is an exceedingly distressing report and such an awful topic, but it is important for awareness to be raised by this. Can you just sort of walk me back through how you were able to obtain this kind of data and information?
Sure. So this information comes from 4 independent civil society organizations. So organizations who are working on the ground in Syria and in the border areas, collecting information on deaths. So they collect things like who died, their name, if they were a mother or a father, how old they were, how they died, what were the circumstances of their death. And they compile lists and actually publish them online. Now, the Oxford Research Group was in touch with 4 of these organizations, which were able to share this data with us.
You know, I think for me, what was most disturbing among the many atrocities in the report is that, I guess we would expect that children, might be an incidental casualty in a civil war, but that some of these children were targeted. What was most distressing to you about this report?
Debbie, I mean, all of it was very upsetting. The sheer number of children who have died in this conflict, but you're right. The fact that people or parties to the conflict would target children, and the fact that we would see 764 executions, summary executions, and children who've been killed by snipers. It's very distressing, and it indicates, a certain nature of this conflict, which we haven't seen before.
Is there any indication when these children were targeted, why they were targeted?
There's no, the report covers 30 months of the conflict, and there's a definite spike late in 2012 and this year. There's not really an indication as to why they're targeted, but we see that, older boys are most at risk of being killed in this conflict. So the age group from 13 to 17. And this is because, older boys are out there, they're doing errands for their family. They're sometimes even, helping their uncles. And sometimes they could be mistaken as fighters, as combatants.
Were there particular areas in Syria that were most treacherous for children?
We would say that, Daraa was one of the most deadly governorate, and it's a kind of a little governorate outside of Damascus in the countryside. There we saw 1 child in 400 die, and the most severe fighting has been in Aleppo, as we all know, and most of the children, most of the 11,500 have died in Aleppo.
And the report doesn't point out which people are responsible for this violence. Do you know, and why isn't that included in the report?
Well, this report really wanted to tell the story of children. Like, it didn't want it. It was about highlighting how children died. It was about who these children were. It was about how old they were, where they died, and as I said, how. So we didn't focus on who was responsible. Of course, it's an important question, accountability and who is responsible, but there wasn't enough consistent information in the documentation to point any fingers. But we know that the UN has stated that there's reasonable amount of information to point to both. And we see through how children are being killed, so by explosive, by air bombardment. So this is something that the government has access to, but we're also seeing them, 25% of them have been killed in the crossfire, so we don't know, where that's coming from, as well as, being targeted where we know that the rebels have access to small arms.
Can you put this in perspective at all, Hana, in terms of how these terrible numbers compare to other countries, other war-torn areas?
Unfortunately, Syria is not any different than Iraq. It seems that around 10% of the population, when there's, or 10% of those who are killed in a war tend to be children. And again, older boys tend to be more at risk. And the way that children die, mostly in conflict is, or in wars, is by explosive weapons. I mean, these types of weapons are highly indiscriminate, particularly when launched from the air or from a distance. They don't make a distinction between a girl in her bed or, a 19-year-old holding a gun. So, in a sense, the story of children in Syria is not much different than the story of children in other conflicts.
Hana, before I let you go, I know the report also includes proposed action. What do you propose be done?
I mean, the only way to stop this is really to stop the conflict, to prevent further child deaths, to prevent further civilian deaths. We really welcome that the government and the rebels have set a date for the Geneva peace talks. And we hope that the international community can really put pressure on all sides of this conflict and all the other actors in this conflict that are not, fighting, but that are influencing through money and through other means, and they can come to a serious, resolution of this conflict. But also, in the meantime, we hope that the parties to this conflict respect, international humanitarian law, that they stop targeting children, and most of all, that they stop using explosive weapons where children live and play.
Hana Salama, staying up very late for us in London. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Debbie.
Time now to take a look at the other news capturing headlines around the globe in our Rise News World Wrap.